I don't know what's been happening to me lately, but I've been at a crossroads. I've been less confident, more insecure, going on more walks alone. I've been having so many questions about life. What is the meaning of life? Why are we put on this earth? Why did they discontinue the cereal straws? What's really my life's purpose? And who the heck came up with the Wiimote? Nintendo Accessories is Nintendo's weird way of creating more plastic pollution, but getting away with it by calling it innovative. Oddly enough, none of my dates find the DK bongos hot. I keep getting left on red each time I invite them over to play a game of Barrel Blast. Go figure. But some Nintendo add-ons are pretty cool. It seems that for every console they make, Nintendo's introducing some weird quirk to it, whether it's playing a game with motion controls or a freaking glove. Granted, there are some Nintendo accessories where I go, Nintendo filed a patent for this? Nintendo's always at the forefront of introducing new ways to play, and it's actually endearing to see that a big company like Nintendo still take risks with their brand, especially when you introduce the world to something like this. I mean, your stock price should go down just because of this. I mean, there's a whole section of the Wikipedia page dedicated to the GameCube microphone. That's like putting your honor roll award from middle school on your resume. The best part about these innovations is that they truly do enhance the gaming experience, and a lot of them were ahead of their time. Long story short, Nintendo could have wrote an excerpt in the Bible. I can't think of another company that produces gimmicks and add-ons like Nintendo does. They go through more phases than a divorced man in a midlife crisis. Almost all Nintendo consoles have a weird add-on or some weird accessory attached to it. And can you blame Nintendo for making them? If there's two things that people love in this world, it's oxygen and Nintendo. And for me, it's starting to become the last one. And I have asthma. Looking at it now though, despite the innovations, Nintendo does have a weird share of accessories. Especially with the Wii. You ever think to yourself, what if I could talk to a person on my Wii, but also look stupid? Well, do I have a product for you? The Wii Speak was something that terrified grandmothers and made middle schoolers look lame. Wii Speak was Nintendo's way of bringing voice chat over to the Wii console. The Nintendo way. That means with a bunch of strings attached, and I mean that literally. The Nintendo Wii was created with families in mind, and it wasn't really geared towards your hardcore gamers, or normal people. More so that family that you see singing This Little Light of Mine coming out of church on Sunday. The online infrastructure for the Wii was about as strong as my asthmatic lungs, and outside of a couple of games on the Wii, the internet service wasn't the greatest thing Nintendo ever put out. Of course, that distinction will go to whoever invented the L and R button on the GameCube controller. These feel like butter. So with the invention of the Wii Speak, a peripheral that was aimed at giving more functionality to online Wii games, on a console with poor internet connection, this is starting to sound like a match made in heaven. Except if heaven turned out to be New Jersey. This was during a time when playing video games with people online was starting to become the norm. Competitors like the PS3 and Xbox 360 were all the rage when it came to online gaming. The 360 was infamous for its online chats, where apparently everyone there dated my mother. Apparently she's a nice person. But the Wii was sluggish when it came to the internet. It was harder to add people since you had to type in friend codes instead of easy to remember gamer tag. And its online capabilities were worse than its competitors, with the only notable exception being Mario Kart Wii. So with all that being said, why not make a Wii Speak? The Wii Speak was weird. I remember it being announced and having the same reaction I had when I learned that George Washington died. That means no reaction. The advent of the Wii Speak was to provide gamers with a way to interact and talk to fellow Wii gamers across the world. Now, by hooking up the Wii Speak, you have the ability for everyone to hear what your house sounds like. And that's because you have to put it at the top of your television. This is really bizarre. Most other microphone peripherals on other consoles were headsets or microphones that plugged into your controller so that you could hear directly from the people you're playing with. But with the Wii Speak on top of your television, it sounded like a high school cafeteria. This was just a really bad idea that flopped hard. But the weirdest part about the Wii Speak is that it wasn't compatible with a lot of games, only a select few. I remember playing the Conduit online in 2009 and not a single person ever used the Wii Speak add-on. I played Monster Hunter 3 during its peak in 2011 and basically everyone was muted. So I think it's safe to say that the add-on was pretty much a failure in that regard. However, probably the coolest use of the Wii Speak add-on is for Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy! I'm gonna put my Tinder profile to 65+. Now instead of typing, you can say your answers out loud, like an idiot. But Nintendo went all in with the Wii Speak, even going as far as to make a separate downloadable Wii Speak channel. This allowed you to create a room and talk to people with your Mii characters, and also send audio messages. And sure, this is pretty cool, but the only problem is, you need to have a Wii Speak. And also friends. But maybe one of the most unique Nintendo add-ons has to be the Satellaview. Introduced in Japan in 1995, this product was a satellite modem that you would connect to your Super Nintendo, giving you access to downloadable games and magazines. Over the course of its 5-year run, over 114 games were released for the service, and it's easily a product that was ahead of its time, especially considering how downloading and streaming games via the internet has become the norm for video games. One of the cool features of this add-on is that it came with a game called The Town Whose Name Was Stolen, a neat game that was obviously inspired by Earthbound. The game allowed you to create your own avatar, read announcements from Nintendo and play mini games. It might be hard to believe, but Nintendo did online service better 20 years ago than it does now. Subscribing to the Satellaview gave you the option to receive magazines from Nintendo Power and Famitsu, as well as news from other Japanese publications. Nintendo hosted live tournaments that you'd be able to play with other people across the service, and probably one of the most unique parts of the service was Nintendo not only putting their games on the system, but having Satellaview excluded titles, games that are only available if you were a Satellaview user, and this is hands down the best part of the entire service. There was a Legend of Zelda exclusive game called BS Zelda no Densetsu that was split up into 4 parts and broadcast to users in the style of Link to the Past. There was also a standalone version of the Chrono Trigger Jet Bike minigame, a collection of minigames called Kirby's Toy Box, and a re-release of Yoshi's Panel the Pond. Heck, there was even a Monopoly game on there. You know, this isn't even fair. Japan gets everything, and at this point, I'm thinking of writing a letter to my local congressman to protest this. Seeing Nintendo take a chance in streaming and downloading games and music is pretty interesting. Unfortunately, Nintendo has yet to re-release any of these games, so I guess I could just put all my money back into my wallet and use it on something else. Like bribing a local congressman. The Nintendo Entertainment System, basically the grandfather of all consoles, it sold incredibly well and helped restore the video game industry right here in America. It also had a bunch of gimmicks and add-ons for it, and with it being in the 80s, the peak of toys and commercialized physical gimmicks, Nintendo had a slew of add-ons for the NES, like the NES Power Pad and the Power Glove. But probably the coolest gimmick for the NES was Rob the Robot. Unlike the other accessories for the NES, this was actually produced by Nintendo, and this was created for the purpose of introducing the NES to consumers. The robot signified to weary customers that, hey, video games can be just more than a bunch of bad graphics and difficult games. It could be a bunch of bad graphics and difficult games, but with a robot. Coming in with a bulky and plastic design, Rob was actually more than just an add-on. It was desperately needed for Nintendo. Stores were more or less hesitant to put video game consoles in their stores after the video game crashed in 1983, and having a toy robot added to the mix made it a bit more appealing to customers and store managers overall. But with the NES eventually selling well with the release of Super Mario and Rob, it proved that video games do have a place here in the States. Coming released with Gyromite and Stack Up, it was a pretty good idea to create these two easy to understand games with a robot that's simplistic to use. As an NES add-on, I think it's neat. It's not every day that you see a company create a robot gimmick for its console. Except for this idiot. It's what commentators call Trojan horse, a way for Nintendo to break into the industry and really get a good footing without being known as a game company. It's kinda like someone breaking into your house, but with a gift instead of crime. The Rob add-on pretty much laid the groundwork for other accessories for future Nintendo consoles. You see, Nintendo always had something for interactive controls, even back in the NES days with licensing the Power Glove. An interesting controller aimed at putting gamers in control of all the action on the screen with quote-unquote motion detection, or with controls like the SNES Super Scope. But by the 2000s, Nintendo add-ons were put into overdrive, and one of the best examples of this would be the Game Boy Advance release of Yoshi Topsy Turvy. But before Topsy Turvy, we actually had another game with similar gameplay called Kirby Tilt and Tumble, released in 2001 for the Game Boy. The cool part about these games is that it included motion control. By tilting your Game Boy in different directions, it would apply real effects to the screen, like making your character move left and right. The cartridge would come with this odd looking appearance on the front. For both of these games, the cartridge used a built-in accelerometer that determined the rate of motion applied to the game. By plugging the cartridge into your Game Boy system, your Game Boy basically became a Joy-Con by using gyroscope features. Quite honestly, this can be seen as a precursor to Nintendo's other ventures into motion controls and gyroscope. Basically, Nintendo always wanted people to look stupid while playing their games. But not only was the gyroscope cartridge used for those two games, but it also ushered in a new genre of gaming, a game changer that shifted the landscape of gaming forever. WarioWare Twisted debuted here in the States in 2005 and is probably one of the funnest entries in the series, allowing you to now move your Game Boy Advance for already hectic minigames. With Twisted, you can now embarrass yourself in front of your girlfriend. I'm just kidding, who you're fooling, we're playing WarioWare Twisted on a Saturday night. We're single! The gyroscope and accelerometer of these games did however prove a point to Nintendo. That 1, there is an audience willing to play these games, and that 2, it's possible to create an entire game out of motion controls without it being annoying. I'm sure this inspired them with the creation of their future gimmicks and laid out a small blueprint for them when it came to crafting games around add-ons. The Super Game Boy, the answer to life's questions of, how can I play my embarrassing Game Boy games, but on a big screen? This accessory was probably the most intuitive feature for a Nintendo product yet. The Game Boy's hardware was limited, especially when it came to picture quality. Plus, Game Boy games were restricted to 2 of the most ugliest colors when combined, black and green. But as a kid, I didn't necessarily care about the colors that my Game Boy couldn't produce. I was too stupid to even notice. However, with the Super Game Boy, everything changed. It was one of Nintendo's biggest forays into having a home console connect to your handheld console. You see, ever since the SNES, Nintendo's always tried to find a way to have their home console interlink with their handheld. The GameCube had a Game Boy adapter that worked with certain games like Animal Crossing and Pokemon. The Wii and DS connected to each other in the same way for some games, and so did the Wii U and 3DS for certain applications. The Super Game Boy was a game changer though, allowing Game Boy games to be played from the SNES directly onto your TV, and in color for the first time ever. It's cool to see these games now playable on the television with color, but an even cooler part is the fact that there are now borders for different games. Depending on which game you played, some of them would even be animated. Seeing this technology work all the way back in 1994, you can see how it laid the groundwork for future Nintendo endeavors. After the release of the Super Game Boy for the SNES came the Wide Boy for the N64. This was basically the same thing as the Super Game Boy, but it wasn't released for the general public, mostly just for journalists and developers to use for getting screenshots and recordings of different games. But by the time the GameCube came around, Nintendo reintroduced the concept of playing your handheld games on the television, the same way I reintroduced myself to depression every holiday season. The Game Boy Player, which even though it sounds like a name for a rapper from the 2000s, it was a great concept. The Game Boy Player lets you play your Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games, and I'm sure if you push it hard enough, it'll read this book to me. Taking into account that playing games on a Game Boy Advance was a bit difficult because of the lack of a backlight, playing GBA games on a Game Boy Player makes the quality of these games look much better. They look much cleaner and the colors pop out more, and they aren't as washed out. And hey, I still see people use their Game Boy Players today for streaming and making videos. The Game Boy Player is easily the most definitive way to play GBA games on the big screen. Well, that's legal. And you know what? My congressman got back to me already. He doesn't want me to contact him again. I guess that's mission accomplished. It turns out I finally found the meaning of my life. It's to start a petition to bring back cereal straws.